The storm had come in quick, swallowing the plains in a white silence that made the world look like it had been erased. The wind clawed at the earth, twisting snow into wild shapes that danced and vanished in the distance. Jake Malone pulled the collar of his shearling coat up around his neck and nudged his horse, Scout, into a slow walk. He'd been out since sunrise, checking fence lines and counting cattle that refused to stay where they belonged. It was honest work, hard work, but today it felt heavier, lonelier somehow. He was a man used to solitude, the kind that didn't mind the long stretches of land or the echo of his own thoughts. But as he rode through the whiteout, something unsettled crept in his gut. A feeling that he wasn't alone. The storm howled, and beneath it, there was something. A shape. At first, it looked like a pile of snow beside a broken wagon, one of those old prairie rigs that hadn't seen use since settlers stopped crossing this way. But then it moved, barely, but enough to set every nerve in Jake's body on edge. He slowed Scout, leaning forward in the saddle, eyes narrowed against the wind. "Whoa, easy there," he murmured, patting the horse's neck before dismounting. His boots sank deep into the snow, crunching as he trudged closer. The air burned cold in his lungs, and his breath came out in white plumes. The wagon's axle was snapped clean through, one wheel half buried in the drift. Whoever owned it must have been caught in the storm unprepared. Beside it, the shape shifted again, definitely a person, huddled low, wrapped in what looked like a blanket or a coat too thin for this kind of cold. Jake's hand went to the revolver on his hip, a habit born of too many bad winters and worse strangers, but something stopped him. The figure was small, trembling, almost lifeless. No threat there. He stepped closer, crouching down until he was close enough to see strands of hair peeking out from beneath the cloth, frozen stiff, dusted white. "You'll freeze out here," he said, his voice carried off by the wind. The figure didn't answer, just a faint quiver, a shudder that looked more like reflex than response. Jake frowned, tugging off his glove and reaching out. The skin under his touch was ice cold. "Hey," he said again, louder this time. "You hurt." "Nothing. Just that weak, unsteady breathing." He could see it now, the faint puff of air against the snow. Whoever it was, they were alive, but only barely. "All right, easy now," he muttered, easing the blanket aside just enough to see their face. "Let's get you outta." The words froze in his throat. When the cloth slipped away, a pale face turned toward him. Her eyes blinked open, dull with exhaustion but still carrying something he recognized instantly. Even half buried under snow, even after 2 long years, Jake knew those eyes. "Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking in disbelief. The name seemed to startle her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She just looked at him, like she wasn't sure he was real, or maybe afraid he was. Jake felt his heart slam against his ribs. It couldn't be. Emma Harper had vanished 2 winters ago, after the river thawed too fast and the current took her wagon downstream. They'd searched for days, found splintered wood, a few of her belongings caught in the reeds, but no body. Folks said the river had claimed her. Jake had ridden miles along that riverbank himself, refusing to believe it, until he finally stood over the water one night and said goodbye. And now she was here. "Emma, for God's sake," he tore off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You shouldn't even be. What happened to you?" Her lips parted, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Don't take me back." Jake stared at her, confusion and relief warring inside him. "Back, Emma, you're half dead out here. You're coming with me." She shook her head weakly, clutching the coat tighter. "They'll find me." He frowned. "Who?" The fire in Jake's cabin burned low, casting an amber glow across the rough-hewn walls. Emma lay on the cot near the hearth, wrapped in a wool blanket while steam rose faintly from her damp hair. She had slept for hours, long enough for Jake to question whether any of this was real. He'd built this cabin with his own hands, every log a reminder of the quiet life he'd chosen after the war and after she'd gone. And now she was here again, breathing softly against the crackle of pinewood and the storm still raging outside. He sat at the table, running a calloused thumb around the rim of his coffee mug, unable to stop looking at her. The last time he'd seen that face, she was laughing by the corral, teasing him for losing another bet on a bronc that threw him. That was before the river took her, before the silence that followed. When she finally stirred, a low groan escaped her lips. Jake was on his feet in a heartbeat. "Easy," he said, crouching beside her. "You're safe now. You're home." Her eyes fluttered open. For a long moment she just looked at him, dazed, like she was peering through years of distance. Then recognition softened her features, and fear shadowed them just as quickly. "Jake." Her voice was dry, cracked from the cold. "You shouldn't have found me." He blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? You were half buried in the snow. I wasn't about to ride past and let you die." "You should have," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "They'll come after me now." He frowned, leaning back slightly. "They? Who's they?" "Emma. You keep saying that." She sat up slowly, wincing as she pulled the blanket closer. "The men from Carson's gang. You remember that bank job in Red Bluff 2 winters ago?" Jake nodded grimly. "Hard to forget. Lost a friend that day." "I saw them," she said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to, but I was in town, at the milliner's shop. When the shooting started, I ran out to help a boy who'd fallen in the street. They saw me. One of them looked right at me before they rode off. That night, I found a note on my door. Said if I talked, I'd never see another sunrise." Jake's stomach tightened. "So you ran." She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I left everything. The wagon, the river road, it was all supposed to throw them off. But then the thaw came faster than I thought. The bridge gave way, and the wagon went into the water. Folks must have thought I died, and I let them." Her words hung between them like smoke. Jake stared into the fire, jaw tight. "You could have come to me." "I couldn't," she said, voice trembling. "They'd have come for you too. You'd have stood in their way, and they would have killed you. I thought disappearing was the only way to keep you safe." Jake let out a rough, humorless laugh. "Safe, Emma? I spent 2 damn years wondering if you were at the bottom of that river. That wasn't safe, it was hell." She looked down, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "I'm sorry, Jake, I never wanted to hurt you." For a moment, the only sound was the storm pressing against the cabin walls. Jake rose, pulled his coat off the peg, and draped it over her again. "You're here now. That's what matters." She shook her head, panic flickering in her eyes. "Jake, you don't understand. They never stopped looking. Carson's boys, they've got people everywhere. If they find out I'm alive, then they'll have to deal with me," he interrupted, voice low but steady. "And you know damn well I'm not afraid of men like them." She met his gaze, eyes searching. "They're killers, Jake. They don't fight fair." He smirked faintly, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Neither do I." A flash of lightning lit the window, followed by a crack of thunder that made the cabin shudder. Emma jumped, and Jake instinctively reached for her hand. For a second, she let him hold it, her fingers small and cold against his, but then she pulled away, as if the warmth itself scared her. "I'll leave before dawn," she said quietly. "If I ride south, maybe they'll lose the trail." "You ain't going anywhere," Jake said. "Not while you can barely stand. You'll stay here till this storm breaks, and we'll figure it out together." By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the storm had settled into a quiet drizzle of snow. The land outside Jake's cabin looked peaceful again, white and untouched, except for the tracks that wound down from the ridge. Tracks that hadn't been there before midnight. Jake hadn't slept. He sat by the fire with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the window where the faintest orange glow of sunrise fought against the darkness. Emma dozed fitfully on the cot, waking now and then to the sound of the wind or the creak of the walls. She didn't need to ask what kept him up, she knew. The men she'd been running from were close. When the first crunch of snow came from outside, Jake rose silently and moved to the window. 3 figures on horseback, just visible through the gray light. They weren't riding like neighbors out for a morning check, they were hunting. The lead rider stopped near the barn, scanning the cabin with deliberate stillness. Jake felt his jaw tighten. "They found you," he said quietly. Emma sat up, clutching the blanket. "Jake, you have to go. Please, if they catch you helping me." He turned, cutting her off with a look that was both soft and unyielding. "Ain't the first time I've had a rifle pointed my way, sweetheart. And I'm not about to start running now." He pulled on his coat, loaded his rifle, and grabbed the spare pistol from the mantel, sliding it across the table toward her. "You remember how to shoot." Her hands trembled as she reached for it. "I don't want to." "You might have to," he said simply. The knock came then, 3 sharp raps that sounded far too polite for the kind of men who'd tracked her across half the territory. Jake motioned for her to stay quiet and stepped to the door. "Morning," a voice drawled from the other side. "We're looking for someone. Maybe you've seen her. Woman riding alone, brown hair, about yay tall." Jake opened the door just enough to see them. The leader was a broad man with a black duster and a scar running from his cheek to his neck. The kind of man who smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. Two others lingered behind him, both armed. "Can't say I've seen anyone," Jake replied, his voice calm. "Storm kept most folks indoors. You're a long way from town." The man chuckled. "That's true, but see, I got reason to think she might have come this way. She's got something that don't belong to her." Jake tilted his head. "That right, The man leaned slightly, trying to peer past him into the cabin. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Jake smiled faintly, though his finger hovered near the trigger. "I do mind. Folks don't come snoopin' in my home uninvited." The scarred man's smile faded. "You sure you wanna make this your business, cowboy?" Jake stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold bite into his skin. "I reckon it already is." For a long moment, the wind was the only sound. Then the man sighed and nodded to his partners. "All right then, have it your way." The first gunshot split the morning silence like thunder. Jake dove sideways off the porch, firing as he hit the snow. One of the riders toppled backward, his gun clattering from his hand. The others took cover behind the barn, returning fire in sharp cracks that echoed off the hills. Inside, Emma crouched behind the table, heart hammering. She wanted to scream, to run, but instead, she remembered Jake's words, "You might have to." Through the smoke from the fire, she saw a shadow move past the window. Without thinking, she raised the pistol and fired. The glass shattered, and the shadow fell. Her hands shook violently, but she didn't have time to process it. The gunfire outside had stopped. Silence returned, thick and final. Emma waited, holding her breath, until the door creaked open and Jake stepped inside, rifle in hand. His coat was torn, snow crusted along his shoulders, and there was a dark streak on his cheek, not blood of his own, she realized, when he wiped it away. "It's over," he said quietly. She stared at him, disbelief and relief crashing together. "Are they?" He nodded once. "They won't bother you again." She dropped the pistol, tears spilling freely now. "Jake, I never meant for you to." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Hush now," he murmured against her hair. "Ain't your fault. You've been running long enough." For a long moment they just stood there, the fire crackling beside them and the snow drifting quietly past the shattered window. The storm outside was easing, the sky softening into pale blue. When she finally looked up, Jake brushed a lock of hair from her face and gave a tired smile. "Told you, sweetheart," he said softly, "you'd freeze out here without me."